Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm really happy to have with me once again Quinton Hennigh. He's the president and CEO of Novo Resources. Novo Resources is traded in Canada under the symbol NVO, and in the United States you can purchase it as well, as I have, under the symbol NSRPF. It has traded as high as close to $1.90 Canadian over the past year, but has recently trended down towards $1, I believe, at about $1.10 or so in U.S. money. Novo Resources is not currently a sponsor of this show, but I believe this company has the prospects of early gold production. But more importantly, it has one of the most exciting stories of any I have covered in my newsletter since I began writing it back in 1981. The reason for my excitement hinges on the possibility that Dr. Quinton's theory of how the most prolific gold mine in the history of the world was formed is correct, and that he may have identified a property in northwestern Australia with a similar geological environment and prospects for outlining something similar to that great gold deposit in South Africa. Well, Novo is working towards earning a 70% interest in that property in northwestern Australia. And its largest shareholder, I think, is worth noting, it's Newmont Mining, which last I looked is owning more than 30% of Novo Resources. The gold deposit, of course, that I'm referring to as the greatest in history is the Witwatersrand of South Africa. If a little junior can find something that convinces major mining companies that they're on to something anything remotely like the Witwatersrand, I think the share price of that stock should do exceedingly well. And I think also a point in Novo's favor is the fact that it has a relatively low number of shares outstanding. Approximately 61 million is what I think is the latest account. In the meantime, though, even before Quinton's theory is proven or disproven, what we do know is the company has the potential to become at least a small-scale gold producer in the not-too-distant future, possibly. If successful in that regard, and if it can produce some cash flow, it should help to reduce the dilution, which is really the bugaboo for so many junior mining companies, exploration companies. I should disclose the fact that this stock is my own personal largest holding in a highly diverse portfolio, I should add. There's certainly a lot of other things in there too, but I am very excited about it, so I have put more into Novo than on any other single stock. And it is a recommendation in my newsletter, Jay Taylor's Gold, Energy, and Tech Stocks, which you can subscribe to by going to miningstocks.com. Well, welcome, Quinton. It's really good to talk to you again, and you're, I understand, in Perth, Australia today.
Yeah, that's correct, Jay. Appreciate you taking the time, and look forward to hearing some questions here.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you taking the time. I have to think that your time is every bit, probably a lot more valuable than mine, but in any event, you have noted in the past that the Witwatersrand deposit is far and away the largest gold deposit ever mined in history. Can you put the scale of that deposit in perspective compared to some of the other great mines in history?
Sure. The Wits Basin, which is about 300 kilometers east-west and about 150 kilometers, say, wide, has several gold fields in it, which have collectively contributed on the order of 1.6 billion ounces in production over about a 130-year period. It was discovered in 1886. Production increased dramatically from 1886 all the way up through the mid-1900s. It's declined since then, but its still cumulative production has been almost, well, in excess of a third of the total gold production on Earth.
Wow.
The holy grail of gold exploration would be to find a similar deposit somewhere on this planet.
Yeah, and that's what you're trying to do. After many, many years of exploration experience working for Newmont, you're working through your academic background, and I think you did some work at the Colorado School of Mines, perhaps on Witwatersrand rock, that sort of got the wheels turning in your brain as to where something else like this might be found. Can you give our listeners a sense of what your theory is, the geological environment that you believe was the environment in which the Witwatersrand deposit was formed, And then can you talk a little bit about the similarities of the property that you're working on now in northwestern Australia?
Sure. The Wits Basin formed in early Earth history, so we're talking about a period called the Archean. This would have been in a time frame from about 2.9 to 2.7 billion years ago. If you look back in Earth's history, continents did not just appear overnight. They developed through a slow process of sedimentation and weathering and accretion and various things. If you look back in Earth's history at the Archean, there would have been very few continents around. There would have been just a handful. And they would have been sort of like the nuclei of the present continents. They would have been small, call them islands, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
The island that the Wits Basin formed on is called the Kapal Craton. The Kapal Craton is composed of granites and rocks called greenstone that are older than the Wits Basin. They're about 3 to 3.6 billion years old. Mm-hmm. And then the sediments that were derived from those, the quartz-bearing sediments you see in the Wits Basin, were largely derived from the weathering of that craton. Here in Australia, we have a craton called the Pilbara Craton. It's equally as large as the Kapal Craton, and it's a very similar age. It's about 3 to 3.6 billion years old. It's also composed of granites and greenstones. And many people believe that the Kapal Craton and the Pilbara Craton were once connected and would have formed what would have been the largest protocontinent way back in the Archean time. Mm-hmm. So, therefore, it makes sense to look at this region here in Australia as a possible analog setting for Wits Basin. We have this unit called the Fortescue Group, which is a very thick sequence of sedimentary and volcanic rocks that formed during the same time as the Wits Basin. It formed from about 2.7 to 2.9 billion years ago, and it has a lot of correlations. You can see similar, similar order of sequences and rocks and types of rocks, and also these gold-bearing conglomerates here in the Pilbara that are seen over in the Wits Basin. What we're looking at is an area in a place called Nullagine, which is a small town of Newman, the Big Iron Camp. Mm-hmm. In the Pilbara. We're looking at an embayment, essentially a fossil estuary, if you will. It was kind of, if you think of it like the Chesapeake Bay or something like this. Mm-hmm. And we're towards the upper end of the embayment, where it appears that sedimentation was occurring. So, rivers were bringing in sediment off of the craton into this embayment. And it's in this shallow water setting that we think the critical process for forming Witwatersrand-like deposits occurred. A lot of people have speculated on the origin of the Wits. Some speculate it's a true placer deposit, like a fossil placer. Mm-hmm. Some speculate it's a hydrothermal deposit. There's issues with both of those arguments. First of all, if you look at the Wits, the sheet-like deposits that you find in the Wits are very unlike alluvial deposits we see today. They're vast things. They're vast, continuous sheet-like systems. Mm-hmm. You don't see alluvial deposits quite like that. So there's, geologically, it's hard to make that leap. That said, on a local scale, yeah, you can see some alluvial characteristics in mm-hmm. this. I have no issue with that. The bigger issue is the source of gold. If you think about the volume of gold, 1.6 billion ounces. Think of how many cratons, how many greenstone belts you'd have to grind up, erode and redeposit to form something that large. It's just kind of mind-boggling. The same could be said about hydrothermal origin for the Wits. Think about the largest, say, hydrothermal system on Earth, the largest orogenic gold system on Earth, which would probably be the Superior Province. Collectively, I think it's around 200 million ounces. You need 8 of those before you could equal the Wits. So there was something that occurred in South Africa during that particular time frame, the 2.7 to 2.9 billion years, that really defies explanation. I believe that that there was another possible source for the Wits gold, and that was the seawater itself. This estuary would have been connected to the broader ocean, and seawater chemistry during that time would have been much different than it is today. Today we have oxygen in our atmosphere. In fact, oxygen makes up about a fifth of the atmosphere. Back in the Archean, there would have been very little oxygen. The little critters, the photosynthesizing organisms that produce oxygen, would have been just getting a foothold here on Earth. And they, in effect, were just starting to put out a little bit of oxygen at that time. Oxygen was competing with other gases like hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide and methane, perhaps. These were gases that are conducive for the dissolution of gold. Gold is actually quite soluble in solutions of hydrogen sulfide, say. As soon as you introduce oxygen into a system that has soluble gold, the gold precipitates out. So the idea is that the microbial activity way back in the Archean, once that took root and really got going and started producing oxygen, you see a precipitation event. And I believe it's true for the Wits Basin as well as other systems. I think a lot of the cratons, or rather the granite greenstone belts that formed during this time, were enriched in gold through this kind of chemical event. It effectively sucked the gold out of the oceans and put them into sediments and whatnot in the sea floor. And those sediments some were preserved like the Wits in a broad and open basin. Others were squished up in orogenic terrains and produced some of the great orogenic deposits of that time. But it was basically a worldwide event that pulled gold out of seawater and put it into the huge number of deposits we have from that time frame.
So there would have been a high concentration of gold in the water, which precipitated out then with the occurrence and the generation of oxygen, right?
That's correct.
And then now I first talked to you. I sat down with you at the PDAC this last March and started focusing on this a few months earlier than that. You've been working down there for a number of years in Australia on this project. Is there anything that you see at this point in time that would suggest that your theories, or that would discourage you from thinking you're onto something here?
I think we can say honestly that there is a true alluvial component to what we're seeing. Now that said, the facies of rocks. What I mean by this is the environment that we're seeing at Nullagine is not all that well preserved in the Wits. If you look at the Wits, most of the rocks were deposited in somewhat deeper water, so more distal environments. Imagine being in Chesapeake Bay. We're way down towards the ocean end of the bay, in the Wits, rather than the upstream end. And Nullagine, what we see is we're in a much higher energy environment where we have larger boulders and coarser gold. Now, the recent work we've done, this was the Portland study we announced a few weeks ago. It sounds a bit academic and scientific and whatnot, but it's actually telling us quite a bit. The gold that we see is often associated with a mineral called Gerstorfite. That's a common mineral in the Witwatersrand basin. In fact, most of the gold particles have wee bits of Gerstorfite attached to them. Then we also see carbon. We see carbon particles in the conglomerates. They were pretty well documented in the deportment study. We believe those are detrital pieces of kerogen that are basically remnants of the microbial life that were present at that time. So, but that said, I believe we also have a true component of alluvial gold in this deposit. It's whether it was derived from, say, a carbon leader type source, or whether it was derived from orogenic sources in the Pilbara craton itself, we can't determine. The chemistry of the gold doesn't shed any clues either. But I think we'll learn more and more as we study this deposit. We are seeing evidence of multiple transgressions, like sea level rises within the stratigraphic section there at Milligan. And so we're definitely at the interface between, say, a terrestrial delta, being pushed into the ocean, and ocean waves, encroaching on that delta back and forth over a long period of time. And that's the perfect environment for forming one of these deposits.
So the higher energy area, though, would account for the what you're finding in terms of it's broken up, the structure that would have been laid down earlier.
Yeah, in other words, we're seeing what's left of it. It's been reworked perhaps multiple times.
Yeah, so I guess the answer, the long answer then, is that your theories, as far as you're concerned, have not been disproven at this point. If anything, what you're seeing confirms what you've believed all along.
So far, we're seeing strong evidence for it, but I would say that if we're going to find a Witz-like thing, it's going to be further out in the basin somewhere. Like,
sure.
If I'd say, your typical planar leader reef type material or carbon leaf type material, it would be further out in the basin or further down the embayment where the water, the system was quieter, lower energy.
Sure. Yeah, and I guess for now, though, your target, you do have a drilling program, an ongoing exploration program now. I should tell our listeners that your resource was 421,000 ounces, I believe, grading 1.47 grams per ton, which doesn't sound too bad these days for open pit prospects. Can you tell us a little bit about your existing exploration program and what you plan to do in the near term?
Sure. With this deportment study, we recognize now that the gold is largely coarse. In fact, 98% of the gold in both samples we submitted reported to a fraction of gold that was in excess of 150 microns. And what that means is that, imagine a millimeter. It's about 2 pencil, let's say.
Yeah.
The gold particles in these samples are all what's classified as coarse gold. Coarse gold being over 100 microns. So it's roughly about 1/5 of a pencil width are the smallest grains that we see. And then there's, of course, larger grains. But basically what that means is, there's the potential for recovering a lot of that gold in a gravity operation, a gravity mill scenario. Now, your listeners probably have some familiarity with how gold is processed. You can capture a lot of gold in certain ore types through gravity means, meaning fairly cheap techniques that have been used for literally hundreds of years. That is like the optimal processing technique. The second technique is obviously a solution, where you put in the solution and you extract the gold from the rock by dissolving it. Well, that's a little more complicated, a little more expensive. So we're quite optimistic that the gravity production might be a possibility here at Milligan. And part of our commitment to earning in the 70% with our neighbors there at Millennium Minerals is that we must submit a bankable feasibility study by August of 2016. So our strategy going forward at Milligan or at Peatons Creek is to drill out a considerable oxide resource, something that could be permitted very easily and quickly, and target these high-grade reefs. So we're gonna sharpshoot our exploration efforts, our drilling, our costines, trenching, our bulk sampling. Everything is going to focus on these reefs where they come near surface, say within 20 meters of surface, where they're well oxidized, and they could be easily mined in an open pit and processed potentially by gravity techniques. Yeah. So we've got a lot coming up. We've got drilling starting in a few weeks, probably about 2 weeks. We've got some costines that we're going to be putting in September. We're doing detailed mapping at present. We just finished collecting 12 bulk samples for metallurgical testing. In fact, I supervise a collection of the 12 samples. We're shipping those out in a couple of days. We've got a lot of things on the go. We've identified an environmental contractor here in Perth who's going to do our floral and faunal assessments, and we're also going to start our social negotiation with stakeholders in the area.
Good. So you do have a lot of things going on. Bulk sample results will be forthcoming when fairly soon, do you think?
They will. We've done some very large, like 100-kilo samples. Those go up to Canada. Those analyses should be back in, I think, in late September, early October. We've got some samples, though, that we've done some more screen metallic assays on. These are basically a quick and easy test of coarse gold. We're going to put samples through a screen and assay the material on top of the screen as well as what goes through the screen. You can kind of get a feel for how much coarse gold is in a sample. We might have those numbers a bit sooner, but recent sampling, I think we put out a news release, say, a week ago that illustrates what we expect to see from our recent samples. That the screen metallics that we put out are definitely catching a lot of coarse gold.
That's really good news. Now, so your bankable feasibility study is due by 2016. We should assume or look for that date, or might it come sooner?
We anticipate moving this forward fairly quickly. We'll probably have an oxide resource put together by early 2015, and we anticipate putting a feasibility study together by the latter part of 2015. We're not going to push it all the way to the deadline. We're going to try to get it done by late next year.
Okay, so it looks like things are really coming along pretty well. How is your funding situation now?
We're doing fairly well. We've spent a few dollars on the regional work at this point. I think around $1.5 million. That's with the BLEG program and regional reconnaissance. But we've also seen quite a few warrants exercised here recently, which is bringing money back into the bank, and we're basically treading water now. I think we're at around 9.5 or 10.
9.5 or 10 million in the bank at the moment. And how far will that take you?
We'll easily be able to reach our goal with bankable feasibility. We can. That's our main objective, is to secure the 70% ownership, and also move this thing forward as quickly as possible. We can. We see an exceptional opportunity here for potential cash flow, so we're going to jump on it.
So, Quinton, that's pretty remarkable. If what you're telling me, if I understand what you just said, is that you think you're close to having enough money to take this project through bankable feasibility. Did I get that right?
That's correct. We should be in good shape to take it through bankable feasibility and potentially take advantage of this cash flow scenario with the gravity production.
Now, just one more question that I just now thought of in terms of putting the area that you're working on now in perspective with the larger claims, because you picked up a huge amount of ground last year. You added to your entire area of prospective rocks. What is your immediate focus would be over what sort of aerial extent compared to the entire target or the entire property area?
Well, we've got to meet this goal of reaching bankable feasibility, and we plan to do so. There's no question about that. I think it's a little early to say what we're going to do in the regional scope. We've got to see the data come back and make decisions at that point. So I'll kind of leave it at that for now.
Sure. So that you're talking about the BLEG data that Newmont assisted you with?
That's correct. It's been a little bit slower than we thought. We had some issues with some cattle stations and getting access to certain ground, but I think we just finished collecting samples about 3 or 4 days ago. Those will reach the lab here in Perth sometime this coming week, and we should see a full set of numbers back hopefully late August.
Oh, that's remarkable. Thank you very much. Anything else you'd like to say in concluding our discussion today?
Well, I guess, Jay, I would say let's all hope gold gets its act together here. It seems to be acting like a sick dog at the moment, but maybe things will
Yeah,
come our
well,
way.
for sure, no doubt about it. No matter how good your project is, if the gold price stays suppressed, and a lot of mining companies are having trouble making money at $1,300, $1,250 gold, it doesn't help the juniors. The whole sector came up. It would certainly make your life easier as well in terms of raising capital in the future. Although I think the good news, from my perspective as a shareholder, if I understood you correctly, is that we don't have to worry about too much dilution in the immediate future anyway. And that's really, I think, one of the biggest bugaboos for all junior exploration investors is this whole thing of shareholder dilution. So that's really good news.
That's correct. I'm a large shareholder of the company, so I
you
can't
care about that.
I cannot stand dilution. I'm going to do what I can to avoid it.
Very good. I really appreciate that as a shareholder as well. And I want to thank you again, Quinton, for coming on today and spending the time, your valuable time, for updating our listeners.
Thank you very much, Jay. Take care.